Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. I hope you are safe wherever you are, and I'm very glad to see you all here with us once again. And this time for the Test Project 3.0 Q&A session, answering all of your burning questions all about the new release that we had last week. And Today with us, we have Marat Strelets, one of our co-founders and Chief Architect Officer at TestProject, as well as Amit Yahav, one of our amazing full stack developers at TestProject. Hey guys, are you with us?
Hi, Karen. Hey.
Hey guys, glad to have you both here with us. And both of you will be answering some of the burning questions from the community that has been joining us today. I see a lot of more people continuing to join, we will start in just a couple more minutes. In the meantime, let's go over the agenda for today's session. We will do a quick recap of Test Project 3.0 and then go ahead and dive straight into your questions. And of course, by the end of the session, we will send everyone a recording of the session as well as a bunch of resources that we've released after the that we've released following on from the event, such as release notes and official documentation and blog posts. So I see someone is saying, Suma is saying, you can't hear me well. Is it better now? Amit and Marat? Better? Great. Thanks, Suma.
Yes, it's much better.
Great. So, uh, please feel free to ask your questions in the dedicated Q&A section in the Zoom. You can see it at the bottom of your screen. And we will make sure to address as many questions as possible today and make sure everyone comes out with all of their answers to the questions that they have about Test Project 3.0. So, just to kind of recap on what we had here last week, it was a very fun session for us announcing the big Test Project X release and announcing what we had behind the screens, which was two major capabilities, the parallel test execution as well as the built-in GitHub integration. And we've been loving all of your incredible support and feedback online. It's been very fun reading that and seeing how much you're all excited about it as much as we were. And the main goal was to really help you all enable fast release cycles, no matter what's your skill set and whether you're a beginner or an expert, everyone can dramatically reduce the time to market, and as well as to kind of bridge the gap between testers and developers, and align your entire testing teams to these days agile development life cycles. So uh, I really hope you are enjoying the new release and having fun with the new capabilities. And I guess I will give Marat the stage to kind of recap a bit about the parallel execution, and then Amit will recap a bit about the GitHub integration, and then we can dive into your questions.
Thank you, Karen.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for sharing these slides. So yeah, this definitely recaps everything that has been said in the previous session. Since the beginning, Test Project was about simplifying things, as you have mentioned. And this version in particular, it simplifies the way you work with the agent that is now capable of executing things in parallel, something that you couldn't do before. You could probably set up multiple Dockers or use standard solutions such as the Selenium Grid, but the Test Project agent was serving as a single execution engine, and by such it was executing things on each browser in the job in parallel, sequentially. So first we had to complete the execution, let's say on a Chrome browser, and then continue further to the Firefox browser. And if you have multiple tests in the same job, which would be dependent one on another, like for example, a login sequence that is following by adding products to a cart and doing other things in your platform or system that is being tested, then this test needs to be executed in such a sequence that first needs to finish before the second can start. And then if you have multiple browsers configured and you would like to cover and make sure that your application works correctly on each of them, then you will basically finish executing all these tests on the Chrome and then on Firefox and then on Edge and then so on and etc., which would increase the time that you need in order to finalize all these tests. Would be a sanity cycle or a regression cycle. But on each release, you will basically spend multiple efforts on testing those. And since the inception of the TestProject Agent 3.0, you don't have to wait anymore for each target to finish. So you can execute the same tests on each browser in parallel, as long as your computer resources allow this. And this is something that we call the workers. The worker is like a separate process that executes the same test suite on each of the targets configured in the job, or when you are executing an ad hoc test, it can execute the same test on each target simultaneously. And it is very similar to the mobile. When you're executing on mobile, since the device is basically being used for a particular execution, then you can definitely execute two different tests on the same device. But if you have multiple devices configured in a job, you can still execute all your tests on each of these devices in parallel, and it's the same for Android and iOS. And the most important feature basically that comes here is that you can execute data-driven tests, and you don't have basically to wait for the previous iteration to finish. And of course, this test needs to be independent. They don't have to rely on one another. So the order of the execution can be absolutely random, but this definitely saves precious time when it comes to executing the same sequence of events with different data. And of course, the whole point here is to simplify things, so you don't need anyone else to help you out with this setup, such as, for example, DevOps or setting a lab. You don't need any Docker to orchestrate. You don't need a Selenium Grid to set up the nodes and then register them. It's all simple. It all comes out of the box with a simple installation of the agent, which is very small in its footprint, and the installation is very straightforward, like next, 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 finish, done. I've been showing how it works in the previous session. So yeah, this is what TestProject 3.0 and the parallel execution is about.
Thank you, Marat. Amit, so maybe recap a bit about our built-in GitHub integration.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So as Marat and Karen mentioned before, we also released a new GitHub integration, which basically allows you to integrate your work on TestProject with GitHub. So it's like, okay, so when you synchronize a project on a TestProject, basically project, as you probably know, contains multiple tests. So each project that is synchronized with GitHub is represented as a repository. And inside this repository, you have all of your tests. Okay, so this allows you to keep track on your progress, on your work, and every change that you make on your test is automatically synced into GitHub, and you can view the history and all the previous commits. One more thing that is very good about this integration is that you can always go back to a specific version of your test. So let's say you created a test and then you saved it in GitHub, and then you made some changes. And if you want to roll back to the original version, you can always do it by opening the test history and go to the commit that you want to restore. And then you have the option to import this test into TestProject. So this can also save you if you made some changes that you want to revert. So it's pretty good. Okay, so
Great.
I guess that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Amit, for this
Sure.
quick recap. I guess now's the time to dive deep into your questions. I know you have a lot of them, so we won't waste any more time on recap and just start answering them. So, guys, I suggest to continue sharing the questions in a Q&A section, and Amit and Marat here will start addressing them.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So yeah, it looks like these questions are basically sorted by people voting for what interests them the most. So I will start with the same order. I believe that if someone is interested in a question being answered, then he should vote for this question. So it will go up in this order ladder. And okay, it keeps changing. So yeah, and Anmol Bag is asking basically how to set the agent auto update. So the agent does have a silent installation option. This could ease on provisioning and installation on multiple machines. If you are using the agent for Windows, you can use the / and the capital S command line argument so that the agent will get installed silently. Basically, what you have to do is, of course, to download the agent using the application. And the most important part is that it is not always necessary. Like sometimes you don't even encounter the reason for the issue or the change that is being introduced in these minor releases, because it is not applicable to the scenario that this person is testing. Sometimes it's a change for web automation, and sometimes it is a change for mobile automation, and it depends on your needs. You don't necessarily have to do it. We have started adding information about what are the fixes and changes and add-ons in each of these minor releases under the major release. So you can go ahead even right now and check in our documentation section and releases for 3.0, what are the changes in 3.03, 3.04, and etc. And this would be the way to go for now, even though we do plan introducing an auto update in the future. Right now, this is basically the solution for Windows users. Now for Mac users, it is even simpler because packages can be installed even automatically. There are different tools for that on OS X. We check them out. We do not encourage absolutely automatic updates because sometimes, as you know, things are changing and evolving, and it is not such a good idea installing something and then seeing your automation break. So we still want it to be like a semi-manual process. Hope this answers this question. Okay. We got this Ahmed. Yeah, go ahead, Amit.
No. Okay. So we have this question about does TestProject, no, sorry, not this one. Yeah. When is Git integration expected to release? So it's already live. You can go ahead now and create your integration. And it's a pretty simple process. Karen, maybe I will demonstrate it.
Yep, that sounds like a great idea. Let me stop.
Yeah, cool.
In the meantime, I will share a couple of resources for the Git integration in the chat.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so you can see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, great. So basically, to create a GitHub integration, you simply need to go to the integrations section. And then on the left menu, you will have this Git option. So if you do not see this Git option, it means that you are not an administrator in your account, and therefore you cannot create the integration. You will have to ask your account owner or any other admin in this account. So once you click on it, you have this GitHub toggle here. So right now it is on because I already created the integration. And if you will click on it when it's off, it will open this window. Okay, now it's in edit mode, but it's the same window. So what you need to provide here is the organization or username from GitHub, of course, and the access key. And once you do that, simply click next, and you can select which project you want to include in this auto update mechanism. So right now I only have one project. I can, of course, now select this one, click save. And to get the organization or username, simply go to your GitHub account. And this is the organization that I'm using. And to create a token, in this menu, go to settings, and then scroll down to developer settings, and go to personal access tokens. And right now I have already created one, and you can create a new one here. So you generate a new token, give it a name, whatever you want. And this is very important. You need to check all the options under repo. Okay. Otherwise it won't work. And then simply click generate token, and I didn't give it a name. Yeah, and that's it. This is the token. Okay. I hope it was clear.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Amit. So let's answer a couple of short questions here. First one from Zishan Ahmed. He's asking you, what's the benefit of Git integration with TestProject? Specifically, it's the GitHub integration. This is our way of allowing you to saving a specific version of your test, so that you can go back and restore this version in case of a need when you change something, so that you can compare, for example, with tests that you were running previously in previous versions of your product, or just in the past to compare with the previous results and so on, etc. So this is your way of like saving a backup copy, and this is the benefit, I believe. Trupti Dave have a couple of questions here. He's basically asking, does TestProject support unit testing of React apps? TestProject is about functional testing mostly, although you are creating these functional tests, which are mostly UI tests on React application in the form of unit tests if you are using our SDKs. But the TestProject is definitely capable of testing React applications. They are not much different than any other mobile app. And if you're using the SDK, then yes, you will be creating unit tests to create tests that you're running on this application to make sure it works according to your needs. The second question Trupti is asking is if there is any kind of a limit to a number of users running tests simultaneously. No, you can have as many users as you need in your account. You can create as many agents as you need. The agent, though, is limited by the resources of your machine. So when you are creating the workings configuration, it should be based on your computer core numbers and random access memory that you have available in this machine. And the third question here, if we have any kind of an integration with Jira, the way to go with all the integrations and any kind of an interaction with the data that TestProject provides would be our external API. External API is well documented and has a Swagger UI. And Karen just sent here a link to the API, and you can definitely query any kind of information such as the execution results, or you can create things such as, for example, executions and trigger stuff and so on, etc. And I believe that most of the people are basically trying to somehow connect the reports for a specific testing cycle or maybe some bugs into their Jira. So you can extract reports in form of PDF files, for example, even through the platform without the API, and attach these to your testing cycles. And it is, again, it is applicable for any kind of tool, would it be Jira or the Qtest that we have a tight integration with, and so on and such. We have Alan asking here if we can use a Bitbucket for the repo productioning. No, at this point we have an integration with the GitHub only, although they are all built on Git. So in theory, eventually we might have additional providers. You've got Kernan Iswam asking about TestProject 3.0, question number 4. He's saying that his next question is about how to downgrade the agent, because sometimes the old recorded tests do not run an updated agent, so possible to downgrade it. Yes, absolutely. Let me share my screen here really quickly so that you can see where you can download previous versions. So we always make sure to keep the previous version available. So for example, right now we've got version 3.04 available, which is the latest stable release. But you can always go back to the previous releases and even to the previous major release, such as, for example, in this particular case, it's 237 before the introduction of the parallel execution. And this is your basically way of downgrading the agent whenever you need to. Hope this helps.
We have here another question about the Git integration. Anmol Baga asked about, he says that he was able to create the integration and he asked where the repository is getting created in GitHub site. So let me share my screen again. Okay, so once you created the integration in GitHub, you need to go to repositories. Okay, so here I have 2 repositories and each one represents a project in TestProject. So for example, this, my first project, you can see here that I have 2 tests and that's it. Okay, you can also, you have indication in TestProject that your project was indeed synced with the GitHub. So if you do not see this icon, it means that something went wrong, and you can of course contact us.
Thanks, Amit. So Sarita Reddy is asking if it is possible to run tests offline using the TestProject agent, and the answer is absolutely. The only thing to consider here is that basically the agent is usually coming with some sort of a setup, let's say a specific version of Appium and the iOS and Android drivers, a specific version of the web drivers, and so on and etc. So whenever it is connected and associated with your TestProject account, it is also capable of updating these dependencies automatically. And this is what TestProject is basically all about, of simplifying these processes. But when you're using an agent that is either offline because there's no internet connectivity or it is not stable, or it's not even absolutely associated with your account, we call it an unregistered mode, then you can still use it. You can still run SDK tests and produce local HTML reports. And you can still do different things, but you can't probably rely on all these dependencies mechanisms. And we do have all kinds of explanations of how, for example, to update the web drivers so that if you have a newer version of a browser being installed and you have an unregistered agent that is not capable of updating it on its own, then we do have articles how to do it manually. So there are some limitations of how it can be achieved, but it's definitely possible. Jay Wilson is asking if there is a method to upload tests that have been downloaded and saved offline. So there are 2 different types, I would say, of how tests can be exported. One is like exporting a test into code. So whenever, let me share my screen here. Demonstrate what I'm talking about. So let's say we have a test here that I would like to export. So the first option would be exporting this test into code. Okay, so I can run this generate code option, and then it will present me with different SDK languages that is now being supported for code generation. It will generate a code that will use one of the TestProject SDKs, and you can execute this code from within your IDE. So if I keep this Java and the TestProject Open SDK option here with some default names, let's call just an example or something, and a configuration to run this test on the Chrome browser. Once I download it, we have this zip archive here. And if I just move it really quickly into my Visual Studio Code here, we will see actually a Gradle project here. And of course, you can go ahead and change it into Maven if you like, for example. And so it goes for the other languages. So this is the same test that has been created as a recorded test, but here it is using the TestProject SDK and the driver to execute all these commands. And another important thing here is that here in the build Gradle, there are some configurations done so that it can be exported as coded test. And once you do so, you will get a jar file that you can later on upload here when creating a new test using these code options. So just drop this jar file right here onto this location, then you get coded test out of your recorded test. And of course, the maintenance of this coded test further on is done through the code, right? And the second option would be exporting this test as a local YAML file. It can be either a package with all the dependencies, such as the add-ons and other things used in this test, or it can be just a simple YAML file that when you export it, it just exports the test in steps. Okay, and here we go. Okay, this is the test, and it is quite complex what exactly is happening here, but you can see that all the information is right here, such as, for example, the elements descriptions that is being used and the steps. So if I have any click steps, for example, have any. Okay, so it doesn't specify what exactly, but here we have a navigation. Okay, and then we have something else going on and so on and so forth. But it can be manipulated, it can be changed. And the way you can work with these files basically is that either you can edit it manually, or you can open a file by just dragging this YAML file over here. Okay, and then you can either continue recording this test or just edit this test. And when I choose the edit option, then I will have this steps list presented here. So I can continue on and edit this test here in this editor, and then I can save it again. And since I'm working in a local file mode, then I can save it into the same file. And then these files can be executed using the TestProject CLI, which if you're not familiar with, I have plenty of blog articles and documentation on the CLI. So you can go ahead and review this.
We have this question here from Karnan. He asked about the Git integration. So the question is, need to generate the code manually from TestProject and need to upload it to GitHub, then only it is possible to auto-sync? So the answer is no, if I get it right. You don't need to manually upload anything to GitHub. All you need to do is work on in TestProject, and whenever you are updating your test, for example, if you're adding steps or removing steps or rename the test, so all these actions will trigger the update, and then you will be able to see it in GitHub. So you don't need to do anything manual.
Thanks, Amit. So Sunny Adav is basically asking here about the ratios and the correlation between the amount of parallel instances in the agent and the amount of RAM on each machine. So it says if the system has 8 gigs of RAM, only 2 parallel instances will be executed as 2 gigs required for each worker. Can we run more instances, 20 or so, using Docker? And if yes, setting the configuration, no parallel instances for Docker. So it doesn't matter basically if the agent is running on your machine physical host, or it's running in a virtual machine, or it is running in a Docker environment. Of course, it all depends on how many resources you dedicate to this particular agent and how many agent worker processes it can spawn. If you will have a machine with 64 gigs of RAM, then you can, of course, do more. And the ratio requirement is basically our suggestion. So in theory, if you think that your machine is capable of running more workers, you can increase this number. But you should take into account that if your machine is weak or a bit slow, then at some point you will reach a negative result, because the time it will take for your machine to run the browsers and load the websites and so on, etc., will be greater than if you have less browser instances running at the same time. So it should be balanced. It should be balanced, and you can run as many agents as you want on multiple machines and schedule the jobs to get executed on these agents in parallel, because these are separate execution engines. Jay Burns asks and says that it looks like in TestProject 3.0, it is possible accessing several different mobile devices simultaneously. And if it is possible to gain access to the same device for different applications, or even the same application simultaneously. Unfortunately, no, because there is a single communication channel that is used in order to automate the device. It is some sort of a driver actually running on the device. And as a real person cannot basically have multiple actions being done on a single device, all the automation frameworks, and specifically Appium that we use under the hood, assumes that one single application is being automated at a time to provide the same, I would say, feeling or the way of work as it happens when a user is performing those actions. So one single device can automate one single application at a time, mimicking the actions that the user would be usually doing. So it's more like the limitation of the methodology and the approach rather than a technical limitation, because the applications do run in parallel, but it is not meant to be automated. I think that there is a question from Paul Delmont here, Amit. He's asking if we can execute against multiple GitHub repositories in parallel. This looks like needs some clarification here.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he meant there, but you do have multiple repositories. As I said before, each project on TestProject is represented in a repository. So yes, you can have multiple repositories, and if that's what you meant, then yes.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that. The GitHub integration is for backup purposes, and the execution is something else. You can store anything you want, as many as you want in the GitHub repository, but when it comes to execution, then as I mentioned before, you have several ways of doing this. It's either by executing these recorded tests that are part of the TestProject hybrid cloud, or by exporting these tests into code and then executing it through the TestProject SDK, or by exporting them into a YAML file that represents a local test and then executing it through the TestProject CLI. And Chucky Dave is asking a quick question here about, he wants to know what's the mobile test automation virus browser that supports today. You can refer to the TestProject release notes. All the version details that we currently support are stated there. And what are the Android and iOS device versions that we currently support, and what are the browsers currently support. I believe you can find all this information in these release notes.
We have another question about Git. Can we have GitHub repository for each project? So yes, again, you can have as many as you like, because each project on TestProject is automatically translated to a repository in GitHub.
Justus Machado is asking if he can run mobile applications through Gradle project. Does he need to add an emulator? So any test needs to be run on a particular target. Would it be a physical device, an emulator running on your computer, or some distant device, a cloud device, I would call it, that can be either a physical device or an emulator from such providers such as House Labs and Browser Stack. So eventually you do need some sort of platform for the test to get executed. And when it comes to Gradle project, and again, we mean an SDK project that the test itself is being written using code, and you can run this test on any target. Would it be a local emulator or physical device, or a cloud emulator or physical device? Natarajan Krishnamurthy is asking if it is possible to run parallel tests and also perform scripting using the recorder at the same time. So you can keep the recorder open for, let's say, web test. It will not interfere with the execution. You can still have executions running in parallel with the recorder being open. When it comes to web automation, when it comes to mobile automation, though, I wouldn't suggest it because in theory, when a test is running, then not only it will create some sort of a load on the device and your test will be slower, it can also definitely interfere with your test. And basically, a good example for methodology restrictions is the Apple Safari browser. When Apple Safari browser is open and an automated test is running, you can have more than one Safari open. Like, for example, Firefox and Chrome, they do allow such, but the Safari restricts an automation session to a single window. And even more, it doesn't even let you control this browser window in any kind of way, not to change its size and not to interact with it. So that there won't be any unexpected events happening during the automation, and only the scenario that needs to run will eventually occur. So it's a good thing. It's a good idea to let the automation work and not to interfere. So
yeah, we have this question here, and while uploading a YAML file, everything goes to the root folder instead of respective folder. Why? So this is a known issue. We should address it soon. And then you will be able to select to which folder you want to import the test. But for now, as a workaround, you can always move it from the root folder to whatever folder that you want. And you can even move it to another project.
Thanks, Amit. So Sanya was asking about loops in TestProject and how he can achieve such. So I'm not sure if a loop is more like an aggregation of several steps. There are several ways of looping, I would say. One is using the data source. So let's say, for example, if you remember, if you were present at the previous webinar, then this particular test uses parameters instead of hard-coded values. So the name for the person comes from a parameter called name, and the address comes from a parameter called address. And when I have such, then I can generate a data source as a CSV file here. And then I can edit this data source, and then I can provide different data, and each row will represent a data-driven iteration for the test. So I can just demonstrate that, like 1, 2, 3 York or something, and then the name would be John, and then 3, 4, 5 maybe there, and the name would be Lucy or something. And then once I save it, when I execute this test, then I'm being asked whether I would like to provide these values right here, or just use the default values, or I can override it with a data source. And here comes the parallel execution, because I can execute these data-driven iterations in parallel to save time, because this would be like an independent test, and I can, instead of waiting for the first iteration to finish and then starting the second one, I can basically execute them both at the same time using this data source that they have, of course, to upload first. So I can just add another data source here and drag and drop this file. Then when I execute the test, I can select this data source number 2, and the test will get executed twice, each time with a different data. So this is your first option of looping over things. Another option, in some cases, it makes sense. Let's say you have a numeric up-down control, and you can just repeat the same test. You can just repeat the test and execute it multiple times. And it's not only about steps. Sometimes it's also about complete tests. So let's say I have a sequence of steps, and when I execute this sequence from another test, creating a nested test, then let me just create here, create another one. And let's delete this step here because I don't need it. And let's add another test, which would be this test. And let's make visualization here. So this is a nested test, okay? And this test can be executed more than once, okay? And can repeat it 5 times. This little icon here says that this test will be repeated 5 times. And if you want to make it work conditionally, so let's say we have some sort of a parameter. Let's search maybe in here for something called the set parameter value, I believe. Yeah, set value to parameter. Okay, so let's say we have a parameter called the P1 or something. Okay, and let's set value number 5. Okay, so I can use the conditions here. Okay, I can add a condition, and I can tell him that basically I want this test to get executed only if it equals to 5. Okay, and then this test will be executed only if the P1 parameter will be equal to 5. So this is more like a if-else logic on TestProject. And this is your way of looping and controlling basically what will get executed and when.
Yeah, so Marat, this also answers Gerald's question. He asked about the if-else functionality. And so you basically ask if we have this option and or validations. So we also have validations. Let me show you. Okay, so Marat showed you the condition. So it means that the step will not be executed unless the condition was met. And another thing that you can do is, for example, this is the validation. So go to advanced options. Sorry, that's
validations work on steps
on
get, that have an output. So let's say if I'm gonna
get text. Sorry, get text. Yeah, so this will get a text out of an element. So let's just select a random element, and now you can add validation. Okay, so for example, if you want to validate that a login button contains the word login, so you use the get text option, and then you can add a validation. Okay, so for example, equals, contains, whatever you want, and it will pass or fail the steps according to the value returns from the get text action.
Thanks, Siram Kasala is asking if there is a plan to allow Git on premises, like their own Git, and if yes, when we can expect that. Well, First of all, we have to allow not only GitHub, and TestProject being a cloud application, after all, it's much easier to connect to cloud and online services. But we do sometimes allow different kind of integrations with internal applications. And even today, you can basically achieve the same. You can just export your tests into YAML files if you want to keep an offline copy of such. And you can keep them in your own Git. Then you can edit them from a local folder, and you don't even have to keep anything on TestProject if you do so. So you don't have to wait. You can do it right now. Shruti Dave is asking, sorry, go ahead, Amit.
No, it's okay. So we have this question about Git. Can I have my code as part of some other GitHub repo, like one folder in a project? So yes, if you have a folder inside a project, so I'm inside Amit's project, let's create a new folder just to demonstrate. Oh. Let's do it. Okay, so let's just stop the Git integration for now. And now let's create folder 1. Okay, and now let's make a copy of this one and put it inside the folder.
Amit, are you
Okay.
sharing your screen?
Oh, sorry. No, I'm not. Thanks, Karen. Yes, sorry. So what I did is to create a folder called folder 1 inside my project. Okay, and I have one test inside. So right now, if I'm going to sync this project with the GitHub, let's see what happens here. No, just a second. Oh, wait. Sorry. Okay, so we have a little problem here, but basically, once you create a folder, it should be in your repository. Okay, so it won't be flat like that. You will have here another folder, and if you go inside, you will see the test. And right now, I'm running in some problem, but it is working and tested.
Thanks, Amit. So let me share my screen here. I want to show something. Shweta Rao is basically asking if it is possible to execute multiple tests in a multiple browsers simultaneously. So when it comes to parallelizing things inside of a job, it can have basically two different configuration options. One is parallelizing different browsers. So let's say select all of these and even some from my South Labs and even some from my browser stack and so on, etc. So the first option would be running the browsers in parallel. What this will do is that it will, of course, spawn as many workers as I've allowed, and each of these workers will execute the tests that I have in this job one after another on each of these targets. And it is also basically reflected here in the documentation of the parallel execution. Let me show this to you. Here. Okay. So let's say I have two different browsers configured, the Chrome and the Firefox, and I have two tests in my job. Having the parallel execution option selected, only this option here for running browsers in parallel will cause the agent to spawn two workers. Each worker will execute these tests one after another on each of these targets, right? But if I will have this option selected, run both browsers and tests in parallel, it would implicitly mean that the browser will get restarted before each test is being executed, it also means that there's no relation between the tests at all, so that the first test is not something that should be executed before the second one. So if you have scenarios in which you first log in into your application, and then you are performing some actions that only logged in users are allowed to perform, this is not something that you should be using. But if these two tests are not correlated one to another and don't have any kind of relation, you can and you should be using this option, because then your tests and anything else will be executed in a form that you can see here. Basically, you will have the first test executed in parallel in each of these targets, and then you'll have the second test executed, because here it is limited to 2 concurrent workers. But if you will have more concurrent workers configured, let's say 5, okay, then you'll have test 1 executed on Chrome and Firefox, test 2 executed on Chrome and Firefox, and even test 3 executed on Chrome, because you have allowed 5 workers on this agent, and you have selected these run both browsers and tests in parallel, which creates sort of a controlled chaos, I would say, but it makes sure to execute your job as soon as possible without any correlation to the order and the sequence of the tests inside this job. Well, we have plenty of other questions here. I'm just wondering, yeah, we have one here, which is rated as with 2 votes. Deepman Gupta is asking if he can have his code as part of some other GitHub repository, like one folder in a project.
Yeah, Marat, I think I answered it before, the same question. So yes, you can create a folder in TestProject, and in GitHub, you will find this folder under the repository, the project's repository. So yes, it is possible.
Okay, so what else you've got here?
I guess we have time for a couple last questions before we have to end the session. So let's pick a couple more.
Yeah, I can see basically people are already starting to answer one to another. Like Siram Kasal is basically asking for a demo of 2 users using Git. How can they manage the changes when contributing simultaneously for things such as conflicts, perhaps? Branch management, and he's also saying that coded tests are not seen on GitHub, and if there's any kind of a configuration for that. So I will start my answer from the end, and then Amit, perhaps you can continue. Coded tests are coming from your own code, right? So when you code them, you're probably already using some sort of a source control. And when you upload them to the platform, you're basically uploading a binary version of your test. So I believe there is no point of storing version controlled binaries, because this is not what the source control is made for. It makes sense to use your own on-premises or online source control to store the source of these coded tests. And that's basically why they do not appear in the GitHub integration we've got. Now about the conflicts and other things, Amit, you explain how it works?
Yeah, if I understand the question, so when you make changes on your test, it's stored in GitHub. And if another user make also changes on the same test, it will also be stored on in GitHub. And then you have the option to go to history and review the changes in each version. So I don't think that you will have issue with the conflicts. Basically, because you are not pulling a version and then start working on your branch. It simply stores the history of the test.
Yeah, it basically creates a revision. So whenever anyone edits this test, it creates a new revision, and therefore you shouldn't have any conflict. And well, it doesn't happen in parallel, right? Like both of you are saving the test, and someone saves the test before the another, and this
you will have
when
basically
the magic
two versions, which you can, of course, revert. And if you want to import a specific one, it is possible. Yeah. So let's add one more thing. So if you do have a conflict, you can always go back to the previous version. So it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, so Jay Burns asks here if the SDK is available or is needed for the Agent 3.0 or the 1.0 versions of the SDK will work with the Agent 3.0. And Santosh kindly answered here that it does work. Yes, it absolutely works. Although we promised to add the parallel execution to the SDKs, which will happen in the near future. SDKs 1.0 definitely work on any agent version. And when it comes to specific features that are limited to particular versions, then you'll see a warning log inside of your IDE saying that this specific feature or method or something like this is not supported on this version of the agent. Please upgrade.
Guys, I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah, let's try to choose more.
Pick a good one.
Yeah. Well, I'm basing my answers here on the amount of words for each question. So
yep.
It would be probably easy answering William Nearwood here. He's saying that if he's testing a mobile devices on South Labs, do we recommend that download the code and use the CLI for execution? I would say that it doesn't matter. It's based on your skills, I would say, and needs. Sometimes it makes sense to even senior developer creating tests using the recorder because it's just easier and simpler and creates scenarios with the components that you don't have a mapping for them and so on, etc. And sometimes it makes sense to export these tests into YAML files based on your organization needs and the security policies and stuff like this. And sometimes it makes sense exporting these recorded tests into code and then continue developing these tests inside of code, like inside of your IDE, creating more advanced scenarios that sometimes are more complex to achieve using the recorder. So it's not a matter of where you execute these tests. Would it be South Labs or local agent or local Selenium and Appium servers? It would be based on what exactly are you trying to achieve and what is your way of work. I would even say that when it comes to the CLI is basically a tool for integrating into the continuous integration pipelines and simplifying things there and executing the YAML files instead of executing something from the hybrid cloud. But even if you're creating recorded tests, you can still use the TestProject API for executing this. So it's a mix and match. It depends on your needs and not on the execution platform.
Great. So thank you very much, Marat and Amit, for this session and for taking the time to answer so many great questions. And thank you, friends, for sharing so many great questions. You still have a bunch of them out there, so definitely feel free to reach out to us on either of our support channels. The team and I are always here to help. I also shared a bunch of links in the chat, so you can go ahead and reach out to us either through social media or the support email, the forum, and of course our built-in chat within the platform.
Yeah, there's so many great questions here that unfortunately remained unanswered. They were short on time, so they definitely suit for the forum, I would say. Would gladly answer all of them right there, especially those that are related to this GitHub and the parallel execution new features.
Yep. So definitely make sure to post your questions over on the forum, and we'll definitely continue responding over there or through any of our support channels. And again, thank you for being with us today. You will always see a recording of this session and a bunch of resources to continue learning more. And the team and I, of course, are always here to help. And that's it for today. I hope you all take care, and we'll see you at our next event. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Have a great day.